in the dark corners of the galaxy, where betrayal and danger lurk in every shadow, one smuggler's routine job turns into the fight of a lifetime. Luca never expected to be caught in the middle of a galactic revolution, but when a mysterious princess running from the most powerful empire in the universe asks for his help, his life changes forever. Now with a 10 million credit bounty on her head and the Empire's forces closing in, they must escape a deadly pursuit, only to uncover a secret that could shatter the galaxy itself. Will they survive long enough to expose the truth? Or will the Empire crush them before they even have a chance to fight back? Get ready for a high-stakes journey that could change everything. The hunt is on. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Luca Vale leaned against the hull of his ship, the Vanguard, as acid rain drummed steadily on the metal. The spaceport around him was a mess, loud, grimy, and full of the kind of trouble you couldn't shake off. It was like most places on the outer rim of the galaxy, a haven for smugglers, bounty hunters, and criminals. Just the way he liked it. At least it used to be. He'd done 100 shady jobs, but this one was supposed to be easy. He'd been hired to smuggle a few rare crystals, nothing too dangerous. He'd met Zariv, the wealthy alien who'd hired him a couple of times before. The deal was clear. No questions. Get paid and leave. Simple. But something felt off today. Zariv arrived late, his long, thin legs tapping against the metal floor of the docking bay. The alien's body was a mass of sharp angles, and his dark eyes scanned every shadow, as though the spaceport itself was out to get him. He wasn't alone. Two heavily armed guards stood behind him, their weapons resting against their sides, ready to snap into action at a moment's notice. The air grew thick with tension. Luca crossed his arms, keeping a cool expression. "You got the credits?" he asked, trying to sound casual. But inside, something was gnawing at him. Zariv flashed, a wide grin showing off his jagged yellow teeth. "Plans have changed, human," he said, his voice smooth but cold. Luca's brows furrowed. "We had a deal," he replied, keeping his voice steady. His hand instinctively went to the blaster at his side. This wasn't right. Zariv's smile never faltered. "Yes, we had a deal, but I will honor it in my own way." One of the guards stepped forward and pulled something from behind him. Luca squinted. At first, he couldn't quite make out what it was. Then the figure stepped into the light. It was a girl. She couldn't have been much older than 17, maybe 20. Her long dark hair cascaded down her back, and her glowing violet eyes stood out against the pale silver markings on her face. She looked out of place in the grime of the spaceport, like she didn't belong in this world. She wore a simple cloak, too clean for the dirt and dust of the docking bay, and she didn't speak. "What the hell is this?" Luca asked, his voice low. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Zariv shrugged, a wicked glint in his eyes. "Your payment," he said, waving a clawed hand in her direction. "She's worth more than the crystals, you're lucky." Luca recoiled. "I don't take people," he snapped. "I don't deal in slaves." "She's not a slave," Zariv said, his grin widening. "But she is yours now. Take her, and we are done." The girl's head turned slowly, and Luca caught her gaze. There was something in her eyes, something powerful. It was like she could see straight through him. Her voice when she spoke was soft but clear. "I chose you." Those words froze the room. Luca stood there, shocked. Even the guards seemed uneasy. One of them shifted his weight nervously, taking a step back. Luca blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zariv's expression shifted. The smile faded. "None of your concern," he said quickly. Then he turned, motioning for the guards to follow. "Take her and leave." But Luca wasn't ready to let this go. "No way," he said, stepping forward. "You think I'm going to walk out of here with some mystery girl and pretend it's all fine? Either pay me or we're done." Zariv stopped, his sharp eyes narrowing. "She is your payment," he insisted. "You don't understand who she is, but soon many will." Luca didn't like the sound of that. He turned to the girl, trying to figure out what was going on. She was standing still, her eyes fixed on him, calm in a way that unsettled him. She didn't look afraid. She looked ready. "What's your name?" Luca asked. The girl paused for a long moment before answering. "Selena." "Selena," Luca repeated. "Are you being forced to come with me?" She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "I ran away. I need a ship. I need you." Luca's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't adding up. But there was a certain determination in her voice that made him hesitate. This wasn't a simple smuggling job anymore. There was more to this than he could see. The spaceport around them felt suddenly too small, as though everyone was watching. Luca glanced around, but there was no one in sight. Only shadows. His instincts were screaming at him to walk away, but he couldn't. He looked back at Selena. "Fine," he said with a deep sigh. "You're coming with me. But if this is some kind of setup..." "It's not," she interrupted. Her voice firm. He nodded, motioning toward his ship. "Let's get out of here." As they walked toward the Vanguard, Luca couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something much bigger than he ever intended. Who was this girl, really? And why did Zarev insist she was more valuable than the rare crystals he'd been hired to smuggle? There were too many unanswered questions, and the silence between him and Selena only made the air thicker. Once they were safely inside the ship, Luca powered up the engines and prepared for takeoff. Selena sat quietly, watching the stars outside the window. She didn't seem nervous, just lost in her thoughts. Luca couldn't help but glance at her every few seconds. Who was she, and why had she chosen him? "Okay," he finally said, breaking the silence once they hit orbit. "Start talking. Who are you?" Selena didn't answer right away. She looked out at the endless void of space, as if searching for something among the stars. "I was born in a palace," she said quietly, "surrounded by machines, guards, and lies." Luca's eyes widened. "That doesn't help me," he said, clearly frustrated. Selena turned to him then, her violet eyes intense. "I'm not a slave," she said softly. "I'm a princess, the daughter of the Galactic Empress." Luca almost laughed. "Right, and I'm the king of Mars." But when he looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that made him stop. She was serious. "I escaped," she continued, "because they were going to lock me away. Or worse." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I know things that could tear the Empire apart." Luca stared at her, processing what she had said, but before he could respond, the ship's alarm blared. Someone had found them. The hunt was just beginning. Luca's hands gripped the control panel tightly as the Vanguard soared through the empty space, leaving the planet's atmosphere behind. The ship's engines hummed low and the stars outside streaked by in a blur of light. Inside the cockpit, there was an uncomfortable silence. Luca glanced over at Selena, who was sitting quietly beside him. Her violet eyes were fixed on the view ahead, though her mind seemed far away, lost in thoughts he couldn't touch. The girl, the princess, was sitting there like nothing had happened, as if being hunted across the galaxy by bounty hunters was just another Tuesday. Luca, on the other hand, could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They had barely escaped the spaceport. He had made a promise to take her with him, but the truth was he wasn't sure what to expect next. "Okay," he said, breaking the silence, his voice gruff. "You said you were a princess, so why don't you start talking? Who are you, really?" Selena didn't answer right away. She just kept staring out the window, her fingers gently tracing the outline of the seat. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I was born in a palace," she said, her voice almost lost in the hum of the ship's engines. "A place surrounded by machines, guards, and lies. My entire life was controlled by the Empire. Everything I did, everything I said. It was all monitored, shaped, and controlled." Luca listened closely, his brow furrowing. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to live like that, trapped, with no freedom. It sounded like something out of a nightmare, and yet here she was, telling him it was her reality. But something about her voice made him pause. There was strength in it, a kind of quiet power that made him want to know more. "Why did you leave?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the controls as he guided the ship deeper into the dark expanse of space. Selena turned to him, her gaze meeting his for the first time. "Because they were going to lock me away," she said simply. "Or worse." She hesitated, then added, "They plan to use me as a pawn in their game. My mother, the Empress, she controls everything with fear. I'm just another tool for her to use." Luca's hands tightened around the controls. "Your mother?" he repeated, a bit surprised. "So, you're telling me you're the daughter of the Empress of the Galactic Empire?" Selena nodded, her face a mask of calm. "Yes, but that empire is a lie. Everything about it, everything I was taught is built on manipulation and control. My mother doesn't rule with strength, she rules with fear, using technology to brainwash entire planets." Luca couldn't believe what he was hearing. A princess running from her own mother, the ruler of the galaxy? This wasn't some fairy tale, it was something far more dangerous, and the girl sitting beside him, who looked so fragile and delicate, was at the center of it all. "So what now?" Luca asked, glancing at her. "You're telling me you want to bring down the whole empire?" Selena turned her head slowly, her violet eyes piercing through the darkness of the ship's cockpit. "Yes," she said firmly, "but I can't do it alone, that's why I need you." Luca shook his head, not fully understanding. "Why me? I'm just a smuggler. I fix broken ships and carry cargo, I'm not some kind of hero." Selena smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You're not like the others. You didn't run when you had the chance. You didn't betray me like everyone else did. Most people would have handed me over the moment they saw the bounty, but you didn't." Luca didn't respond right away. Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He'd always prided himself on doing things for the right price, never getting too involved in other people's problems. But now, with Selena sitting next to him, he realized things were different. She was right. He hadn't run. And now he was in this mess, whether he liked it or not. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, trying to push the thoughts aside. "How do we take down an empire?" Selena's expression hardened. "There's a system, a neural network, something my mother created to control the minds of her subjects. It's hidden across the galaxy in places most people don't even know exist, but I know where it is." Luca glanced at her, confused. "So, we blow it up or something?" Selena shook her head. "No. If we destroy it, we destroy everything. The people who've been brainwashed, they'll be free, but they'll also be lost. Their memories will be erased and they won't know who they are. It's not an easy decision, but it's the only way to end her rule." Luca let out a low whistle. "That's heavy," he muttered. He'd been in some dangerous situations before, but this was something else entirely. Bringing down a galactic empire wasn't just a job, it was a revolution. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden beep from the ship's console. Luca frowned and glanced at the radar. "What now?" he muttered, his heart starting to race. Red warning light flashed on the console and a message blinked onto the screen. 10 million credits. Luca's eyes widened. "You weren't kidding," he said, turning to Selena. "Half the galaxy will be after us now." Selena didn't flinch. "Now do you understand?" Luca didn't answer. Instead, he slammed his hand on the console, switching the ship into evasive maneuvers. The Vanguard jerked sharply as the engines fired up. Behind them, the spaceport's hunters were closing in, 3 ships, all high-speed bounty hunters on a mission to collect. "Hold on," Luca shouted as he sent the ship into a sharp dive. The stars outside twisted into a blur as he banked hard left, narrowly dodging a series of plasma bolts that shot past them. But the enemy ships were fast, and they weren't giving up. "We need to shake them off," Luca muttered, his mind racing. "Get ready for a fight." Selena stood up from her seat, her expression calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. She walked to the back of the ship, opening an emergency panel. Inside, she pulled out a small glowing orb. "What are you doing?" Luca asked, turning in his seat. "Buying us time," she said softly, holding the orb in her hands. With a flick of her fingers, the orb crackled and the lights inside the ship flickered. The next moment, the ship stopped shaking. The enemy ships behind them, once racing forward, now seemed to freeze in place. Their systems were offline. Luca stared at her wide-eyed. "What just happened?" he breathed. "Tech disruptor," she said quietly. "My family used them to control crowds. I modified it. It only affects ships, not people." Luca let out a low whistle. "That's insane," he said. "I told you I wasn't a slave," Selena said, her voice firm. "I wasn't given to you. I chose you." Luca nodded, slowly realizing that the girl beside him was more than just a princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. And together, they were about to change the galaxy forever. The Vanguard drifted silently through the cold expanse of space, the hum of the engines barely audible against the quiet. Luca sat at the controls, eyes flicking between the navigation console and the stars outside. The galaxy seemed so vast, yet right now, it felt smaller than ever. He was no longer just a smuggler flying from one job to the next. No, now he was in the middle of something much bigger, something he couldn't ignore no matter how much he wanted to. Sitting beside him, Selena was just as quiet. Her violet eyes were fixed on the view of the stars, but Luca could tell her mind was elsewhere. He knew she was thinking about her mother, the Empress, and the empire she had been born to inherit. What Luca didn't know was how much it weighed on her, how much responsibility rested on her shoulders. She had told him about the neural network, the empire's mind control system, but he had no idea how much of it she carried within her, how deeply her mother's cruelty ran. Luca looked at her, a sense of urgency rising in his chest. "You said the empire controls the galaxy through fear, through manipulation," he began, his voice rough. "But you also said we could stop it. How?" Selena turned to face him, her eyes gleaming in the low light of the cockpit. "To bring down the empire, we need to destroy the core of the neural network. It's hidden and only a few people know where it is. But without it, the empire's control will collapse." Luca swallowed hard. He had no idea how deep this went. This wasn't just some job. This was war. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. And now, Selena was asking him to help her tear down the system that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. But could he really do that? Could he trust her to lead them to the heart of the empire? Before he could respond, the ship's console lit up with a sudden warning. Luca's heart skipped a beat. A red dot blinked on the radar. Enemy ships were approaching. "They found us," Luca muttered under his breath, his hands flying to the controls. "Looks like we're not getting any time to think this through." Selena stood up, moving quickly toward the back of the ship. "How many?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. "3 ships," Luca replied. "Bounty-class interceptors, maybe more." Selena didn't hesitate. She walked to the storage compartment, pulling out a device Luca hadn't seen before. "We don't have much time," she said, holding up the small silver orb. "This will slow them down just enough for us to escape." Luca raised an eyebrow. "You've got some serious tricks up your sleeve, princess." She shot him a brief, knowing smile, but her eyes were focused. "This isn't a game. We need to stay ahead of them. If they catch us, they'll bring us right to my mother. And I can't let that happen." Luca nodded, the gravity of her words settling in. It wasn't just about him anymore. They were both running from something far bigger than either of them. Selena wasn't just a runaway princess. She was the key to stopping a galactic empire. And if they failed, well, the consequences would be disastrous. The ship shook as the first blast of enemy fire hit their shields. Luca gritted his teeth and banked the Vanguard left, narrowly avoiding another shot. "They're fast," he said, slamming the controls into evasive maneuvers. Selena stepped forward, holding the orb tightly in her hands. "This won't be easy." We're up against the Empire's best hunters. Yeah, Luca muttered. And I've got a busted ship and a crazy princess with me. He twisted the ship into another dive, hearing the ship's hull groan under the strain. Maybe we've got a shot at this after all. But just as he thought they might have shaken their pursuers, the radar beeped again. Luca's eyes widened, in horror. More ships. They were closing in. They've got reinforcements, Luca said, his voice strained. We're running out of options here. Selina didn't flinch. She moved swiftly to the console, plugging the orb into a hidden port beneath the control panel. The lights in the ship flickered, and for a moment Luca felt a sense of disorientation as the systems began to hum with new energy. Then, everything went quiet. What did you do? Luca asked, trying to keep his focus on the ships chasing them. I've jammed their systems, she said, her voice calm but strained. For now, they won't be able to track us. But it's not a permanent solution. We need to jump. Now. Luca didn't hesitate. He set the coordinates for the nearest nebula, a place where even the best trackers would have trouble finding them. With a flick of his hand, the ship's engines roared to life and they shot forward, heading straight into the swirling clouds of the Charon Nebula. This is crazy, Luca muttered, squinting at the glowing mass of gas and radiation outside the ship's window. We're not exactly in the safest place. Selina's gaze was fixed ahead. The nebula will hide us. Just get us through. The ship's sensors were nearly useless inside the nebula. The radiation interfered with everything, making it nearly impossible to track their position. Luca pushed the Vanguard deeper into the swirling mass, hoping they could escape long enough to make a plan. As the ship twisted and turned through the nebula, Luca couldn't help but glance at Selina. She was sitting quietly, her expression a mask of concentration. Despite the chaos, she seemed unshaken. The same couldn't be said for him. His heart was pounding in his chest and his hands were sweaty against the controls. They were deep in enemy territory now, and the bounty on Selina's head was only going to grow. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Luca pulled the ship into a narrow gap in the nebula, hoping they had evaded their pursuers. But just as they thought they were safe, a sudden beep echoed from the ship's sensors. More ships. Luca cursed under his breath. They've been tracking us. Someone tipped them off. Selina didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to him and said simply, "We need to make a choice. Do we fight or do we run?" Luca didn't answer right away. In his gut, he knew the answer. Running wasn't an option anymore. He was in this now just as much as she was. The galaxy's fate rested on their shoulders, and he wasn't about to back down. "We fight," he said finally, his voice steady. Selina nodded, a fire in her eyes. "Then let's make it count." As the enemy ships closed in, Luca prepared for the battle ahead. He didn't know how this would end, but for the first time, he felt like he had a purpose, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The Vanguard shook violently as enemy fire slammed into the shields, sending jolts through the ship's frame. Luca's knuckles whitened on the controls as he banked the ship hard to the right, narrowly, dodging another blast. The stars outside streaked by in a blur of light as the ship swerved through the chaos of space, the nebula's thick gases twisting around them like a storm. "They're closing in," Luca grunted, eyes flicking back to the radar screen. The enemy ships, now only a few clicks away, were relentless, their plasma bolts lighting up the darkness like streaks of fire. "We won't be able to keep this up for long." Selina sat beside him, her face calm despite the fury of the battle, raging outside. Her violet eyes were locked on the console, a quiet determination in her expression. "Don't stop," she said simply. "We can't run anymore." Luca swallowed hard. He had been a smuggler, a fixer, a man who lived by the rules of the Outer Rim. Get in, get out, and don't ask questions. But this was different. He was no longer just running from the Empire or from bounty hunters. He was fighting for something much bigger than himself, for a galaxy on the edge of revolution. "We need to turn this around," Luca said, hands moving swiftly across the control panel. "And fast." Selina nodded, her eyes flashing with something sharp. I'll Handle the rest. Luca turned to her, confusion flickering in his gaze. What do you mean, handle the rest? The Empire's weakness is in its control, Selena explained. They believe their systems are flawless, that no one can break through. But they never accounted for me, or for what I can do. Before Luca could respond, Selena reached for a small device hidden beneath the console. Her fingers flew across its surface and a soft hum filled the cockpit. For a moment, Luca thought he had imagined it. But then the sensors on the ship began to beep rapidly. The enemy ship's systems, once locked onto them, began to falter, their weapon systems stuttering. What the hell did you just do? Luca asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Disrupted their comms, Selena said coolly, her eyes glowing faintly. They can't coordinate their attack anymore. It's a small window, but it's enough. Luca felt a surge of hope, but he knew it wouldn't last. They needed to make a move now or they would be dead in the water. With the systems of the enemy ships flickering, Luca slammed the Vanguard into full throttle, sending the ship diving toward the nearest cruiser. Brace yourself, he shouted, his voice tight with tension. The ship jerked violently as he navigated, through the gaps between the enemy ships, narrowly avoiding a series of missiles. He could feel the heat of their pursuit just behind him, the pounding of his heart matching the beat of the ship's engines. I've got your back, Selena said, her voice calm, almost detached. Luca could hear the hum of her device behind him as she worked quickly. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. He could see the bright, jagged edges of the enemy ships as they tried to track their every move. But now, thanks to Selena's skill, they were stumbling, unable to keep up with the Vanguard's erratic flight path. Then the warning alarms went off, red lights flashing throughout the cockpit. Luca cursed under his breath. They've deployed reinforcements, he muttered. This is getting out of hand. Selena was already on her feet, moving toward the back of the ship. She returned with another device, this one larger and more intricate, her expression hardening as she set it into place. You said you could disrupt their systems, Luca said, his voice filled with uncertainty. Can you do it again? Selena didn't answer right away. She placed her hand over the device, her fingers trembling slightly as the ship rocked from another blast. This will do more than just disrupt, she said quietly. It will shut down their weapons and navigation systems completely, but we only have one shot. Luca's eyes widened. We can't miss then. Selena's fingers moved like lightning as she activated the device. A pulse of energy rippled out from the Vanguard, and Luca felt the ship vibrate under his feet. Through the window he could see the enemy ships falter, their weapons shutting down, their lights flickering. Now's our chance, Luca said, his voice low. Take us in, Selena replied, her gaze steady. With a deep breath, Luca pushed the ship into a sharp dive, heading straight for the largest of the enemy cruisers. The ship rumbled violently as they barreled toward it. Luca could feel his pulse racing in his throat. They were close now, too close, but there was no turning back. He pressed a button, activating the Vanguard's weapons. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship's blasters fired, sending a barrage of energy bolts straight into the enemy cruiser's hull. The explosion that followed lit up the darkness of space like a small sun, sending shockwaves through the surrounding ships. The other enemy vessels staggered, their engines sputtering as their systems rebooted. Luca didn't hesitate. He flipped the ship's throttle, sending the Vanguard into another series of wild maneuvers, dodging the debris and returning fire. We're almost through, Luca said, breathing heavily. Keep going, Selena said, her voice unwavering. We're not finished yet. The battle raged on, but with every move Luca could feel their victory slipping closer. The remaining enemy ships, disoriented and crippled, were no match for the Vanguard's agility. Luca kept pushing the ship, trusting his instincts as the Vanguard danced through the wreckage of the battle. The stars around them burned bright as the final cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash of light. It was over. But the silence that followed was heavier than Luca had anticipated. Their ship, battered and burned, floated in the cold void of space. Luca let out a shaky breath as he wiped the sweat from his brow. They had won. But the war? That was just beginning. Selena sat quietly beside him, her face pale but composed. "It's not over, is it?" Luca asked, his voice low. "No," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "The Empire will come after us. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. But we've made a choice now, and there's no going back." Luca turned to her, his gaze hardening. "Then let's make sure we're ready, because if this galaxy is going to change, we're going to have to fight for it." Selena nodded, her eyes burning with determination. The rise of a new galaxy begins with us. As the vanguard drifted deeper into the darkness, they knew their journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and the road ahead was uncertain. But together, they had ignited the spark of rebellion, and the stars would never be the same again.